Okay, so welcome. Welcome to the present seminar. I am Benjamin Pierce, and my co-organizers for this series are Nicole Imorlica and Georgie Jin. I'm not sure, well, you just saw Nicole. Georgie, you should step onto the podium as well if you can. I'm not sure if I'm in your way. But anyway, everybody will get a chance to wave to Georgie soon. We are delighted to have you here. And the full title of this seminar series is Social Presence in Virtual Event Spaces. That's a little bit of a mouthful, so I want to very, very briefly unpack it for you. So first of all, social presence. Social presence is, of course, one of the varieties of presence that people in the Chi community talk about. Social presence is the sense of being in a virtual space with other people. And of course, this is a very old topic. People have discussed it for decades, as we're going to hear in just a minute. But it's a topic with special present-day relevance because of the way that the world is moving online for communication of all sorts. And in particular, Nicole and I and the other organizers of this seminar series and the Chi workshop that it's attached to are especially interested in presence in virtual event spaces. So not just one-on-one, not just many-to-one, but situations where situations that are particularly challenging as far as social presence because of the large groups involved, because of their unstructured nature, because they involve many users that don't use the platform all the time, because users are used to going to conferences and have very high expectations for the kinds of interactions that they'll be able to have, and because almost certainly those particular social conventions that have arisen over the decades and centuries that make physical conferences sing will not be exactly the ones that we need in a virtual context to get the same kind of benefit. So there's a huge amount of there are hugely challenging questions about how to create social presence in the context of virtual events, at the same time as there is gigantic new interest in virtual events because of we're still in the middle of a pandemic, because of climate change, because virtual events can be so much more accessible, so much cheaper, so much more convenient, and so on. So the confluence of those things is what led us to be really interested in trying to gather the community that would be able to inform each other and go forward in these areas. We have a whole series of seminars coming. So besides John today, we have a rather different but totally related to the main themes talk on why working from home will stick by Jose Barrero next week. And then talks coming up in future weeks from Krista Lopes, from Anita Blanchard, from Richard Ladner, Catherine Ibister, Carla Grigio, and others. So it should be super exciting. We hope that you will join us for many of these talks. Also, we hope that you will join us for the Chi workshop that is being organized for May 1st. We hope that you will come to the workshop. We hope that you will submit position papers if you would like to speak at the workshop. And if you would like to, you should know that the deadline for that will be February 25th. We will advertise how to submit proposals to the same mailing list that we've used for this. And speaking of mailing lists, please do join our mailing list. We have gathered a whole bunch of names of relevant people and spammed them. In a week or two, we will stop spamming the whole list and just use the mailing list for announcing future seminars. So please do join the list. Maybe Georgie or Nicole, you could dump this URL into the chat so people can not have to copy it down. All right. And now, with no further ado, let me quickly introduce John Tang. John is a legendary researcher in this area, currently with Microsoft Research, and he's going to give us a historical perspective on social virtual spaces. I'm very excited to hear what he's got to say, so I will take no more of his time. John, please take it away.
All right. Thanks very much for the introduction. At my screen share. All right. I hope everyone can see that too and get some confirmation. Great. So thanks very much for the introduction and for inviting me to be part of this event. As Benjamin mentioned, my name is John Tom. I'm currently at Microsoft Research. I also have an appointment at Stanford University. And I'm going to talk about reflecting on social virtual spaces, learning from history, and designing for the future. And note, I'm not calling it metaverse, or I'm actually trying to avoid that term. It's getting a lot of press these days. One of the reasons I don't know that it's very helpful. It's more confusing than helpful to me currently. I don't think people know what it means. So I will probably I try to actually explain what I think. Well, I'm going to talk about social virtual spaces and whether you want to call it a metaverse or how that applies to the metaverse will be up to you. So I want to begin with a question like, what's been missing in our pandemic experience? Either in a traditional kind of video calling experience like this, where, I mean, video is great, don't get me wrong. I've spent a lot of my career focusing on what video can do to support collaboration. It's especially great at conveying some of the nonverbal expressions like disagreeing or showing confusion. You know, it's really hard when you're talking to someone to explicitly come out and say, you know, I disagree with you or I don't understand what you're saying. But you can do that visually very subtly and kind of in a socially acceptable way that allows you to come to greater understanding. And also managing conversation. If I want someone else to take a next turn or kind of if I'm thinking about something, but I want to hold on to the turn, you can often get those cues visually through video in ways that you couldn't in, say, just text or audio. But nonetheless, whether we're using a conventional video calling interface or some of the more innovative ones that have come up lately, it's Microsoft Teams Together mode in the left, or Zoom's immersive view, or even this platform we're experiencing today, or something like Horizon Workrooms, I think we can all say that it's not, we feel like we're still missing something. So actually, I do want to give you a chance to use your tables to talk a little bit about what have you found, what particularly just focusing in on what social presence are we missing in our current pandemic experience? And just to prompt you with a video to remind you what it looks like to meet in person, you know, there's like some side conversations going on here. There's some interesting background to look at during meetings. What aspects of social presence are you missing? So I'm going to give you just a minute to chat among your tables about that and invite folks to share some of the highlights from that. So go ahead and chat among yourselves at your table. And if you're not at a table, feel free to navigate to a table and join one. Chat with others, and it looks like some people also found their ways to tables. I'd like to invite people to either go to a mic and share verbally a highlight from their table, something that they're missing, or you can also add it to the text chat. I'll say, for one thing, when I usually do exercises like this in a meeting, I get you know, to hear the murmur of the room talking, which I did not hear at all. So I have no idea whether people got into this or were like totally silent because I was missing that sense of presence. But any other thoughts? I'm seeing some comments about discussions after an event. I agree. So having an event is one thing. It's the talking to people as you're leaving that also would be kind of neat about joining in a meeting. Jason, looks like you're at the mic. You want to share?
Yeah, I had a funny experience this fall because we hadn't been back for a while, so I've forgotten what I really liked the most. And for me, it was being in the office with the open door and people coming by and stopping a chat with whatever's on their mind.
Cool. Those impromptu, unplanned encounters. You know, a lot has been said about how we've been able to maintain the strong ties during this pandemic, but it's the weak ties or the unplanned or serendipitous connections that we're missing. Okay, I'm getting some comments in the chat about echo. So I think I'm going to try to, I have a headset on. We tried to debug this earlier. I'm going to try to get through one section of the talk which needs the audio, and then I'll reshare without the audio on. Okay, so we're going to keep going. And I think, and I love that we're trying things. So it's a timely to think about what social presence cues are missing because, as I mentioned earlier, Metaverse is becoming a big buzz in terms of how we're going to design our online presence or how we're going to participate in activities online. And so I think it's really important to think about that and plan intentionally, and I certainly hope it's not going to look like this. So I'll play this video of an introduction to a Metaverse-like environment.
I'm here with Nika, Matt, and Hannah, who are already fully immersed on the Nth virtual floor and are basically able to explore stations about robotics, about quantum computing, about new innovative technologies, which we couldn't bring here, but now with this exhibit, you are able to all come together on the virtual floor and explore and see what's out there. What
so
can clients and companies do with this? This is basically...
I think, I hope you notice how, to me, unintentionally hilarious it was to watch three people gathered in the same physical place, but with a VR headset on, kind of looking around, not really interacting with the people that are sitting right next to them. And I hope that that's not what our future looks like. Okay, so one of the things I want to do is look a little bit back at the history of social virtual reality or social VR. It's not new. I can think of at least one example back in 1985, a project called Habitat from Lucasfilms by Randy Farmer and Chip Morningstar. It was run over the Quantum Link network. There's a link to a video that you can find about that. But this is one of the earliest expressions of a virtual social space where people could meet, they could communicate via text, they could navigate around and with avatars so they have a sense of presence or where people are going. And we're going to just see a short clip of a promotional video for this old kind of original social VR system. Oh, sorry, before we do that, we need to go in a bit of a time machine and remind ourselves what 1985 was like in terms of technology and what was available to us. So first of all, if you think as a prompt, a popular movie during 1985 was Back to the Future, very apropos for a topic like this. So thinking about when Michael J. Fox was running around in the DeLorean, trying to do time travel. More interesting to me is I looked at the median age of employees when I gave this talk at Microsoft and realized that 37 years ago is longer than the median age at Microsoft and many high-tech companies. So that means that over half of the employees at the high-tech companies that are building the metaverse or social VR have always lived in a world where that idea was floating around. They've never known not having a social VR in existence. So that's kind of an interesting thought. But here's this promotional video about what it looked like.
Yeah, let me see that. 5 cents, Pops. The name's not Pops. I just want to find out about this here parallel world.
It's called Habitat, but cough up that dough, Pops. No playing games.
Jimmy, the name's not Pops. Look, I promise I'll pay you as sure as my name is Valentino.
Valentino? What's going on here? What kind of game are you playing, Pops?
Pops and his friend Jimmy aren't the first people to get drawn into this strange new world where names can change as quickly as events. Surprises lurk at every turn, and the keynotes of existence are fantasy and fun, here in a place called Habitat.
What's a teleport? Where am I? And who in the heck are you?
It is said that boredom once ruled the lifestyles of the avatars, the beings who populate this world. But recently, all that changed, with the birth of an alliance between powerful beings both here in Habitat and in the human realm, and with the cooperation of a huge mainframe computer in Virginia. Now, using their modems and Commodore computers, people from Westport to Walla Walla can join Quantum Link and Lucasfilm on an electronic journey unlike any other.
Okay. Well, hopefully the production values give you also other clues of what it was like to be in 1985. And I'm going to try, just because I've been hearing some concerns about echo, I'm going to take away the audio because I've played my videos. Hold on just a second. Here we go. So hopefully that might address some of the echo issues. So I'm hoping you can still see my slides again. Great. So now just to clarify, there was no, the audio was part of the promotional video. It was a text only, but avatar world where you could navigate around places that you could create, and you could communicate with each other through text chat. But all the elements are there, right? Being able to communicate over distance, being able to maneuver or in a virtual world, be able to kind of create and experience these different places. All that was starting to happen way back in 1985. So a lot of research has been focused on this area since then. Again, some of the earliest work back in 1998 presented, I think this was, ACM Transactions, talks about understanding kind of just the dimensions and the spaces in mixed reality or virtual realities places. So they laid out a framework which looked at whether your existence was physical or synthetic, or we would call virtual today, on the y-axis. And what they call transportation really is kind of distance or remoteness. So whether you were local or whether you were remote on the x-axis. And that creates these nice quadrants about physical reality, telepresence, augmented reality, or virtual reality. And they populated some research projects at the time in this space. If you recognize these names, then, or if you don't, you could go back and look them up, but they were pioneers in this space. We could locate some of our contemporary tools in this space as well. Video calling it certainly enables remote interaction, and video is a form of synthetic or hybrid interaction. Telepresence, a telepresence robot, something I use almost on a daily basis before the pandemic, which allows remote people to have a physical presence in the room, is certainly an interesting point in that space. And then, of course, these various virtual worlds that have becoming more popular now, Facebook Horizon Workrooms, Caves, or even participating on a desktop. And those are up in that virtual space. Something that Microsoft has been promoting, Mesh, which tries to connect physical spaces with the virtual space. All are in that realm up in the high parts of the virtual axis. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Metaverse, which I've been avoiding. I think Facebook would like us to believe that Metaverse is about this top right corner, Horizon Workrooms. But I would think that at least the Metaverse includes anything in this virtual realm that besides just everyone joining as a virtual avatar. But even that, I think, is inadequate for thinking about the Metaverse because, you know, this almost assumes that everyone meets only remotely. It doesn't acknowledge kind of a hybrid existence where some people might be meeting in person because there's lots of advantages of that, and others might be joining remotely. And so we might need to think about a metaverse definition that embraces some of these more physical ways of meeting along with these virtual representations, at which point this becomes a question, well, what does metaverse really mean, or what is helpful by using this term? And I think we're sorting this out in our industry, and I would just encourage us to be careful or thoughtful about what we want the metaverse to mean as we go about designing it. Okay, again, looking at some historical work from 1998, there was this early virtual conferencing platform called Massive. But what I really liked about this is laying out some of the key concepts about how we could enable people to interact in these virtual worlds. And the paper called out some things called Nimbus, which is like what's the realm in which people would be aware of B's presence? Like who can see or hear B? That would be B's nimbus, the realm in which people would become aware of B. Whereas there's also a notion of focus. Well, where is A focusing such that they're paying attention to just select aspects of the world? And if A's focus and B's nimbus intersect, then there's the opportunity for communication, the opportunity to negotiate. Is this a good time to talk? Do we have something we'd like to talk about? And that is kind of necessary to enable negotiation or interaction to occur online. And I think this is a core concept that we need to think about in any mediated communication system. How are we providing awareness of nimbus and focus so that people can gracefully and naturally start and maintain their interaction? Now, again, this is what VR looked like in 1998. These blocky figures that barely had an indication of a face, that sort of front-facing indicator and arm, so that you knew where people were paying attention to, where their focus was. And even back then, they had like overhead views and a shared screen, primitive as it was. But again, the elements were there. The technology was rather primitive, but the fundamental understanding of how can we orient ourselves so that we notice what people are paying attention to and when people aren't paying attention. I love this rendering, by the way, of Adrian, who is not active or idle. And so the avatar, if you want to call it that, for Adrian demonstrates that he's not focusing on this conversation. Okay, some other steps along the way. Bonnie Nardi did some great work of World of Warcraft, applying anthropological study to that very rich social online environment, which demonstrated how it supported a wide range of very rich social relationships, interactions with guilds where you had to have a consistent identity and a reputation to enable that teamwork, as well as these sort of random battles or raids where you weren't accountable necessarily for your actions, and those had very distinct behaviors that emerged from that affordance. And so she saw that World of Warcraft was a place that supported rich social structures and gave a virtual space a sense of social place. Moving on to Second Life, launched in 2003 by Linden Lab, is popular, say maybe 2005 to 2010. I do want to point out what popular meant back then. So peak concurrent avatars in Second Life was about 88,000 in the first quarter of 2009. For perspective, compare that with 13 million Zoom users in April of 2020, or 145 million daily active users in Microsoft Teams in July of 2021. Of course, we've seen an explosion in the pandemic, but just to give you some perspective of what popular means. So Second Life had a lot of virtual environments where people could interact, like you could see up above, but also some kind of enterprise or productivity environments. The bottom picture is from an NSF review panel where instead of gathering in Arlington, Virginia, they were able to have reviewers join virtually and review proposals in Second Life. And so, yes, there was a range of activities that occurred in Second Life, and as Benjamin points out, it's still going strong. Well, it's still going for sure, and it could see a boom in this sort of metaverse um, uh, boom. IBM in particular invested a lot of work in Second Life, actually was at IBM Research during this phase, where they had a lot of events in Second Life, both within the company and trying to relate to customers. This next one, they had an internal conference where they had over 200 people participate online in Second Life, and that kind of created a lot of advocates within the company to try to spread this use of technology for business purposes, for enterprise purposes. And some other more recent reviews or analyses of what happened in social behavior in Second Life over time, where they became sort of less exploratory in a fantastical way, and they became more kind of part of just interacting online. And so again, there was a fair amount of social science research that tried to understand what was going on in Second Life and how it compared to sort of social life in the physical world. But what happened? Some of the comments mentioned forgetting about Second Life. Maybe some of you have never even heard about it before. What happened to that hype that came in? Well, there's the usual technology of people losing interest after a while. There were some definite usability barriers or roadblocks. It was hard to use, hard to learn how to, besides navigating around any of the kind of interesting social interactions or emotions, required remembering keystrokes. So it was largely keyboard driven. Of course, it required a high computer and network requirements, even without a VR headset, right? Back then, in order to render these avatar worlds, these virtual worlds, it required quite a bit of network bandwidth for the time. There was an interesting dilemma about, well, what was Second Life? Was it a game? Was it a social networking site? Was it a place to actually do real work? And I think this kind of vagueness and identity made it confusing for people to figure out how or if they wanted to engage in Second Life. One thing that they do point out is that although there was a very vibrant in-world economy in Second Life, so you could do things in Second Life that would gain Linden dollars, I believe they were called, that you could use to then buy, upgraded avatar appearances or skins or costumes or things like that. So there was a very vibrant in-world economy, but it didn't cross over into the real world. So a lot of companies went into Second Life thinking, oh, if I could introduce people to products that they would then buy in the real world. And several companies tried this with cars or with other devices, and it didn't really happen, at least back then. It was most successful, I'd say, in education or collaboration around artifacts where you wanted to render something and allow people to work on it together. There were some stories about how it was useful in marginalized populations, so people with disabilities or even people in the Middle East. There was a story about how, in general, there in certain cultures in the Middle East, women are not allowed to participate in some educational activities or some social activities, but they were able to do this in Second Life or in social VRs. And so that's an interesting opportunity that kind of gets beyond some of the limitations that are placed in the real world. I will point out that one thing that came out of this was a very early attempt back in 2010 of mixing virtual avatars with people physically in the room. And so if you look at this picture closely, you see there are people meeting in a room along with a virtual avatar that everyone is seeing with very lightweight glasses, kind of like an early prototype of Google Glass. And so the system, again, IBM was involved in that, called Acme. I don't know if they were at all aware of the irony of Acme of cartoon fame, but augmented collaboration in mixed environments, which gave an early experience of what it would be like to mix virtual and real participants in a meeting. Okay, so that's a bit of a historical dive into some of the social presence world. I want to broaden a little bit and think about other ways of experiencing social presence online. Telepresence Robot, I've already referred to that. This is how I connect with my team up in Redmond, Washington, the headquarters of MSR. Did this almost daily before the pandemic, and if you haven't seen these, they give the remote person a physical presence in the room, which is really great, giving them a seat at the table. As a remote person, I can direct questions to people by aiming at certain people, and I can tell when people are talking to me versus, just staring at a screen with a couple different other video tiles, and no one knows who they're addressing just by that gaze. There also have been efforts in currently in using VR in education. This is some work by M. Eifler, Evelyn Eastman, Payod Panda at Microsoft, where they have been using, I believe, Mozilla Hubs and other virtual spaces in education settings, where especially during the pandemic, and labeled classes to gather in a virtual environment, especially design or creative arts questions that involved classes that involve demonstrating student work in a studio environment and people going around and visiting and looking at them. And when they talk about this, they notice how social structures kind of occur even in VR. So there's a presenter in the center in the red circle. There's a few students paying close attention. Their focus is on her in the inner white circle. There's some students or some actually other faculty that are in a broader circle. They might be paying attention to other things or setting up things for the class. And there's even one student on the far left that appears to be kind of exploring on their own, which happens even in real life classrooms. And so they saw this pattern also in this VR instance. And of course, examples of classes that are taught using a VR headset. This is an example of one that was done at Stanford, again, during the pandemic. So, but another area I want to talk about social presence, not only through how people are represented, but through some of the transitions that occur into interaction. So, I think we're all familiar with these Zoom rooms where because video calls start and end at the click of a button, you have these very ungracious approaching and leave taking, and especially at the end where a meeting might be wrapping up and someone might want to add something, but you're already heading for that leave button and you've hit leave, and then suddenly it's all gone and you've lost that context, right? And this has to do with the fact that the current design for video calling really doesn't take a very sensitive approach to starting a video call, or leave taking, ending one. So approaching, when you in physical world, you would approach someone's open door, as was mentioned earlier. You got a lot of visual cues. Is this a good time to start an interaction? Are they busy, intent, or do they look like they're open? And you could decide very gracefully to negotiate starting a conversation through those cues that you could see. And similarly, leave taking, if I'm sending signals that it's, time to kind of end and I'm gathering my resources together and it looks like I'm about ready to leave. But if you have some last minute thing you want to talk about, you still have time to negotiate that before kind of leaving, which you don't have in this world where you sort of close the window at the click of a button. So I would encourage thinking about those transitory cues, that how do we help people start and end conversations is a big part of enabling social presence in worlds, right? Fading in and fading out, we actually did explore that in a prototype called Montage at Sun Microsystems, where videos, instead of immediately popping up on your screen, they would kind of fade in with a sound, and they would also give a bit of a countdown before they left. And another kind of way of expressing social presence, I want to say, it's not focusing on the person, but on focusing the environment around the person. We did this prototype called Wish You Were Here at Microsoft Research with my colleagues Gina Vanoli and Corey Inkpen, where we inserted people into someone else's environment to be able to interact. So, and we did a study which compared what we call traditional picture-in-picture, where you just have a preview window of yourself and the other people versus compositing yourself into someone else's environment. And so, you know what, this has sound, but I'm just going to narrate it instead. Here's a little bit of a demo of this. And so conventionally, we have one person standing in front of a green screen, and this is what, it also allowed you to take a picture, but we could then insert them or composite them into, they were actually at a flight museum in Seattle. And they could take pictures, of course, with the bunny ears. That's one of the first things that people did in this. But just to give you a sense of how different it was for conventional video calling versus if you were included in their environment. Yeah, sliding is definitely a problem, but this shows you just this very primitive prototype, what they did, again, in the museum, in the traditional method, but also changing now to being composite. And I do think taking pictures, which is a very important social act, is an important affordance of this prototype. So it allows you to document that you had this moment together. And they do some, you have to negotiate how to frame yourself, but you have all the cues to make sure that you can kind of find your place in the picture and then take this picture. Just some other examples from some other people where they were able to take advantage of the environment and kind of have a joint experience. So, it's more like this person was visiting the museum with them rather than just kind of joining along in a video call. And they have some fun with a couple pictures. And I'll just get one more example. We call this sort of better than being there, where, he kind of mimics getting into a space capsule on exhibit, which if that happened in real life, someone would be calling security, but they're able to do this virtually. Okay, some examples, sorry that we didn't have the video for that. But again, what I loved about this project was the illusion of being together that generated, and we're documented with these photos. It's a little bit hard to tell who's physically at the museum and who's virtually joining in our prototype. But we had these examples where people said they would share these photos with not only the people that they went with, but maybe other family members to show that they had this event, even though it was sort of a remote event. Okay, so moving on. I want to focus on a more recent study that's just released last year of needs and features for augmented reality. I would highly recommend this for anyone who's interested in designing spaces today. They did a literature review of studies of augmented or virtual reality systems, and they came up with a list of 18 needs that were identified in prior research that is worth considering as we think about designing our new virtual experience. I just want to highlight a couple. They need to be aware of others' attention and activities. They need to be aware of each other's presence. This is especially true in turn taking, which is a fundamental way of mediating our interaction. They need to see each other's emotions, and they need to stay synchronized in terms of how they're progressing or being engaged in a task. And then also this need to coordinate attention, knowing how to direct their attention or being aware of what they're attending to, what objects they're attending to, being able to, and that's key to be able to actually work on something together. And I would point out this really evokes this concept of nimbus and focus that was brought up, way back in 1998, and still a core issue about how we need to think about designing effective virtual spaces today. And so I'm going to kind of use that to review a couple different settings and understand what is interesting about them from a nimbus and focus and interaction point of view. So looking at Nimbus about a physical world where people are gathering in a place, you're generally aware of people's Nimbus by, are they visible? Are they audible? And I would point out that everyone is aware of each other's Nimbus. That's something that's reciprocally aware. Whereas Nimbus in a video call, you can, that's whether their video window or their, whether you're being seen in your video window, or if you aren't showing video, then you're only showing an icon. That's a very different sort of Nimbus that's being projected. Again, whether audio is unmuted or not determines your Nimbus in a video call. Text chat is another way of being, letting other people know that you're there. But of course, there's the question is the video window even visible on other people? That's something that you don't know about how other people are experiencing a video call. And so a tricky thing about Nimbus in video calls is it's asymmetric. I don't know how aware you are of my presence, because it could be affected by a number of things happening on your desktop. Is this video window covered up by something else? Are you paying attention? And I have zero feedback about that. And in a VR, in a virtual reality world, Nimbus is controlled by your computer-generated visibility or whatever alternate views you might have, and also audibility, which could be controlled by whether you're muted or not, or whether the system is choosing. Like in this system, audio has this very interesting importance where some people share audio and other people don't, and your awareness of that depends on your ability to kind of see these groupings and tables. But then there are these other kind of portholes in audio Nimbus where the mics or me at the podium broadcast to everyone. And so the fact that this is mediated, and it's unclear how aware people are of how the computer system is mediating your Nimbus. Focus, similarly, if you go down that column in physical world, I can tell if people are looking in a certain direction by their head position, by their eyes. That's, again, reciprocal. People know where everyone else is looking. On the video world, focus is still asymmetric. I could be looking at your video. I could be looking at something else on my screen. Typing text is actually a more reliable sign of focus. But again, because it's asymmetric, there's a fair amount of room for misunderstanding or not knowing who's focusing on whom. And again, in the VR world, because it's all rendered by a computer, there's cues about gaze direction, which the computer is generating, but there's this question about whether that is connected with the actual attention of the person behind that. Likewise, interacting in the physical world through talk, through gestures, through movement, we're reciprocally aware of that. In the video world, talk and gestures and movement and typing, again, but modulo whether there's mutual awareness of that. And in the VR world, though all that talk, all those gestures are driven or inferred by movement by the VR platform. And so it raises questions about, I guess, the robustness or the sense of interaction that it can support. So I think some things to think about are how much user effort is required to convey Nimbus and focus. What are the device requirements? Especially the reciprocity. How can I know who's looking at me, who's focusing on me, who's aware of me? And that all affects the kinds of interaction that can occur in these different worlds. So I want to kind of close with some concerns about virtual reality, especially around equity and inclusion. The first one is just like, what is fatigue look like in a virtual world? I think based on the experience I've had, it's like Zoom fatigue plus. You've got this heavy thing on your head. There's the way it's kind of taking over your perceptual field. And a lot of people that I know find that it's hard to take for long periods of time. And then some other points studies show in general that women are more sensitive to VR motion sickness than men. That's something to pay attention to. the whole question of exacerbating the digital divide with headsets and network bandwidth, and some accessibility concerns with VR. So taking some of those in turn, motion sickness and gender, there's been a couple studies that looked at why there might be more sensitivity among women than men in motion sickness induced by VR. Perhaps different ways in which they move their body, perhaps just some sort of ergonomic ways in which pupillary distance is managed, although some of the headsets have an adjustment in that, whether that's enough to manage that correctly. And some of them might be specific to how people approach tasks, right? And I think older people would be another population to worry about in terms of their sensitivity to motion sickness. VR and the digital divide, this is one that really concerns me. Of course, it's the added expense of VR headsets and the computers to support them, but especially the high-speed internet requirement. So this graph at the top shows like ranges of internet bandwidth needed to support various kinds of technology. And I think VR is somewhere in that 20 to 50 megabits per second range that's needed to have a reasonable experience. And then if you look at the chart at the bottom that plots internet connectivity by income kind of quartiles or bands, and you'll see that higher income bands in the green and blue at the top are in that 20 to 25 range, which would support kind of VR interactions, whereas lower incomes tend to fall below that threshold. And so if we move to, we are moving to a world where there's more remote online interaction, we need to figure out how to support or enable the whole range of the population to participate in that. And then some very practical accessibility concerns. Obviously, any visual environment, this is true for video, but especially VR, is a challenge for people who are blind or visually impaired with low vision, especially thinking about how to describe all the dynamic movement that occurs in a VR world to someone that can't visually perceive that. You can just imagine sort of the added challenges for that. And then a study that I was involved in with a colleague at Microsoft Research that looked at sort of the physical capabilities of putting on a VR headset. Just putting on a headset and tightening the control in the back is not possible for a range of people, or having to manipulate two hand controllers. There's one story said, the person only had use of one arm, yet this one VR game wouldn't even let them start until they could press the start button on both hand controllers at the same time, which was physically impossible for them. So how could they do that? Or just some strength issues, being able to press buttons. In this picture on the right, took both hands to be able to press a button, which of course was a problem for this person, and yet the VR system would assume that, just kind of assume that that was a capability of the user. And so it shows this quote that people wouldn't be able to have the full experience given their level of ability. Okay, so I'd like to end with a bit of a challenge. Like a lot of VR promotions, they just assume that everyone is in the VR world. And I think this has an underlying assumption that people are going to join remotely. And that's going to happen at like a switch of a button, that people will be meeting the way they currently do now, but suddenly we're going to wake up and all join this VR world together. But I think that's problematic on lots of accounts. First of all, I think we're all anticipating a hybrid work phase where some people are going to be able to join physically in meeting rooms, but others will want to join remotely. And so making sure that we include this in any virtual world is important, and often missing in any kind of depiction of a virtual reality world. But not only people who are joining physically, but joining through other ways. Obviously, some might be joining with a headset, others might be joining with a laptop, others might be joining audio only because they're blind, or because they're driving, or because they're in a situation where their eyes are busy with something else. And yet, I think we probably are aware of examples of people that join meetings that way today. How can they be represented in this virtual world? And I'll throw in another example of people who might be time shifted. So working across global time zone boundaries where people might be in a dramatically different time zone, but still want to be included in a meeting, maybe through pre-recording some of their contributions, maybe through watching recorded meetings, or we could even do better than that. We had a project called Time Travel Proxy that explored ways of joining meetings in an asynchronous time-shifted way. So making sure that, and in fact, this might even be an advantage of virtual rendered participation in meetings that would allow participating even if you're kind of joining asynchronously. So I think this would be an interesting challenge about how do we think about future virtual worlds that are inclusive to these various forms of participation. And with that, I think I'll close. Thank you again for inviting me. And I think we'll have time for questions, which can be done through the chat or through coming to the mic. And also feel free to reach out to me at my email address. But thanks again for inviting me.